Okay, welcome back to part 3 on the Renaissance. This is for Unit 5. I want to go back just a little bit for a second because I realized that I did not um, did not even mention Albrecht Dürer by name when covering this page. I was so busy talking about some of the distinct differences about the Northern European Renaissance and how it was going to later influence um, the High Renaissance that I didn't really get to emphasize just what I wanted to say about Dürer himself, which was, I mean, Dürer is a truly amazing um, individual. And to a certain degree, sometimes it's easy to almost think that like the high Renaissance in Northern Europe was Dürer. And there were other artists, we just don't have time to cover them all, but he was a really amazing figure. And he was kind of like the Leonardo da Vinci of Northern Europe. He was, autodidact, interested in learning everything as much as he could, studied, everything he could as he was making his art, and was very talented at all kinds of different art. And so a very impressive, interesting artist. But as I was saying, I was going to talk about the High Renaissance in Italy. And I wanted to start with Del Sarto because, to a certain degree, he's not the most famous name. I wouldn't necessarily say he's could represent an average high Renaissance artist because he was uh, pretty well respected, a very, very competent painter, but he's not quite up there in the top rung of the Leonardos and the Michelangelos. Michelangelo respected him greatly and thought he was a very fine painter, um, but later writers felt, notably Vasari, that although Del Sarto was very talented, for whatever reason, maybe not lack of ambition or just a lack of imagination, he never pushed himself beyond just competence. I think he's better than that. I actually think he's a really fine painter and an amazing figure draftsman. Um, and we're going to look at some examples of that. But what I want you to understand is that with Del Sarto, he kind of represents, you know, that there was um, probably about 100 other artists out there that many of you are never going to learn about who were not as competent as Del Sarto, but almost as competent. And that also will help you understand the achievements of people like Leonardo and Michelangelo. It's sometimes easy to see their achievements as being just purely um, their own, right? But really, this was an achievement by a culture, by a group of people, and the competitiveness and the interest in each other's work was a major part of how these artists, developed so much interesting ideas about painting and about art so fast, and in a 200-year time period, really kind of transformed the aesthetics of European art. So there's some more of Del Sarto, and I think this Pietà, where I suspect I might see a little bit of a Fiorentino. I think Fiorentino was one of his assistants, but definitely, but maybe also Pontormo. But I feel like I see a kind of a Fiorentino kind of, or maybe, well, anyway, we'll move on. And but these are just such gorgeous paintings. This is such a beautiful painting. I love the way solidness and yet the lifelikeness, the movement of light on these figures, um, just really beautiful. So the big three, like I said, are the we know primarily because they were turtles. And there's usually an extra credit question on at least one test about which turtle was not a high Renaissance artist, and that would be Donatello. But the three that were high Renaissance artists are Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. And we're going to look at all three of them, and but not all that fast. And for Leonardo da Vinci, I really just want to talk about two aspects of his whole body work. One is that sort of him representing the Renaissance ideal, the Renaissance man, right? And that autodidactic quality, the willingness and the desire to want to learn just about everything, to study anatomy. And like I often tell students, if we had nothing of Leonardo's but his sketchbooks, he would still be an incredibly important artist. His sketchbooks are a treasure. And then on top of that, he's also um, a really important artist because of this development of taking the influence of oil painting in Northern Europe and then applying it to the aesthetics of the high Renaissance of Italy and developing this kind of painting technique that he calls fumato, right, or someone calls fumato, where it's an oil painting technique of layers, thin layers of paint to try to create this kind of smoky atmosphere where the figure just kind of softly blends into the space and the light. And so, and you can see as a contrast, like compared to the more crisp quality of the Madonna and the Meadow by Raphael, you can see that that kind of more smoky kind of atmosphere of Leonardo's work. And that smoky atmosphere becomes incredibly important as it then is adopted into Venetian painting, and then becomes kind of like the one of the founding principles or founding kind of concepts that leads eventually to Baroque painting. So another great high Renaissance artist is Raphael, and we're going to be looking at Raphael especially for looking at the School of Athens. We'll probably see the School of Athens about 100 times in this course. We have a lot of different reasons why we're going to be talking about it. And Raphael was an amazing figure draftsman, probably one of the greatest figure draftsmen of all time. Such an amazingly solid and clear understanding of anatomy, and a really fine painter. And when we talk about fresco painting, we'll definitely be talking about Raphael's skill at fresco painting. Such a fantastic master. And so the third of the high Renaissance arts we're going to talk about, the third turtle, is Michelangelo. And probably most of you know Michelangelo through the Sistine Chapel, if you know his art at all. You probably know his name even if you don't know the Sistine Chapel. And the Sistine Chapel is a truly wonderful work, and it's a great painting. And now that in its restoration, you can really see these beautiful fresco colors that he used. But I want to emphasize one thing, which is that his strengths were really in figure drawing and figure sculpture. He was much better known as a sculptor, much more admired as a sculptor and as an architect than he was as a painter. And I think to a certain degree, his architectural thinking led him to really solve this painting in a design way, right? One of the difficulties of painting in frescoes is that frescoes have to be painted in sections. You have to paint one section at a time because you have to paint while the plaster is wet, and the plaster you can't wet the whole plaster of the whole wall, so you have to do it part by part. And then that leads to these kind of abrupt seams, abrupt edges between one section and another. And so what he did was he solved the problem by breaking it up through this imagined architecture. All of this architecture is painted. This is painted illusion of architecture, but he uses architecture as a way of framing all of these different little vignettes, all these little paintings within a painting. And that allowed him to break things up into smaller and smaller units and to solve the painting problem that way. And it was truly is a remarkable design effort on his part, and it's a great example. I mean, like some of his best figure drawing was done for the Sistine Chapel. But I do want to emphasize, probably even greater a master as a sculptor. And that is my 1 minute warning. So 1 minute warning. So I'm going to just finish up on Michelangelo, and then next for the end we're going to be talking about Venice. All right, thanks.